Alexee's lawyer claims she didn't know she was pregnant and that she was shocked when she gave birth to a baby in the bathroom.
She, and the testimony is pretty clear. We know that the child was not alive, that she tried to help clean up after herself. She had never been in a hospital room before and didn't know anything about pushing buzzers or cords. This was in a public bathroom in the ER. This wasn't a patient bathroom. This was a public bathroom in the ER. This is also a situation where she obviously had never had a baby before. She's the youngest in the family, so she hadn't been around when anybody else in the family had had a baby. And she had never had a vaginal examination ever in her life, and was totally unaware, and had been taking birth control, and she and her boyfriend had used birth control. And she had been working out 2 to 4 hours a night for 6 nights out of the week for months. So she never thought that she was pregnant. It came as a total shock and surprise to her.
This assertion fits the narrative that Alexee is the victim in this situation, that she was caught completely off guard by the unexpected arrival of a baby, leading to a moment of extreme shock that seemed to transcend her normal state of consciousness. While this may be true momentarily, I find it hard to believe that in her state of shock, she inadvertently mangled the umbilical cord, put the baby in a twist-tied bag, then discreetly concealed him at the bottom of a trash can beneath a clean liner. Let's set aside for a moment the debate over the baby's condition during these actions. While the autopsy report indicates one perspective and the defense presents an alternative view, we know that the court will ultimately decide whether Alexee can be convicted of first-degree murder. In defense of Alexee, it may be argued that her decision to discontinue her birth control pills in favor of a diet medication supports the theory that she was unaware of her pregnancy. She simply might have noticed weight gain and embarked on a diet plan to shed those extra pounds. They may say that she was completely oblivious to the potential harm the diet pills may have had on her unborn baby because she simply didn't know she was pregnant. While this may be a well-crafted attempt, in my view, Alexee's claim that she didn't know she was pregnant doesn't hold up as a solid defense, and I believe the jury will reject this notion. We're going to get into it, but first be sure to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on updates to this story, trending topics, and so much more. Now let's get into it. In the context of the bathroom, Gary will paint Alexee as a victim. We see clues to this in everything he says in the media. The bathroom scene is a blind spot for everyone except Alexee. While the evidence she left behind in the bathroom is very incriminating, it's important to remember that Alexee is the sole witness to the events that unfolded in that confined space. It's within the confines of that bathroom that the central question arises. Was it first-degree murder? I talk a bit more about this here in I Put Him in the Sink. You can check that video out here. Though our inclinations may be to label Alexee as guilty at this moment, it's important to recognize that guilt must be proven in a court of law. This is precisely why Gary meticulously directs attention away from the twist-tied bag. That bag is a critical piece of evidence that, in isolation, is very damning and makes Alexee look guilty. So, Gary indeed is preparing a defense, one that will be about everything but the bag. That's why we are here, discussing all the things that our minds tell us are of complete irrelevance to this case. While we already suspect that Gary will come with some of the most incensing accusations, some will have relevance. In the same way prosecution gets to tell their side, Gary will come prepared with his. And Gary's strategy is clear. He aims to position Alexee as a victim, not a perpetrator. He emphasizes her sudden shock and points the finger at the hospital for a hodgepodge of reasons. They permitted her to use not just any restroom, but a public restroom, knowing she was pregnant. They delayed informing her of her pregnancy test results, and they administered morphine before knowing about her pregnancy. These elements are all part of his narrative to establish Alexee as a victim of unfortunate circumstances. Now, we're also going to talk about how he's using that wrongful death lawsuit to accomplish the same purpose in my next video, Bogus Lawsuit. When the topic of phentermine arises, as it undoubtedly will, Gary's stance will be consistent. He will assert that his client had no knowledge of her pregnancy and therefore was unaware of any potential role her diet pills may have played in the tragic outcome. But I don't think the jury will fall for this. Here's why. In seeking to understand Alexee's intent, we should closely examine the choices she made leading up to the tragic events that are at the heart of this case. We've heard about her weight gain, her active lifestyle, and her decision to stop taking birth control, citing weight gain as her reason. And then what followed was the trade-off of birth control for phentermine. We can infer this from two sources.
She did at one point in time, when the ultrasound tech was in the room with her, ask if there was anything. She pretty much said, would there be any bad outcomes if she had stopped taking one medication and stopped taking another? And I said, well, what medications are you talking about? She said, well, what would happen if I stopped taking birth control and started taking weight loss medications? And I was like, I don't know.
It's an odd question.
I thought so.
So the first source is Nurse Elizabeth. She conveyed this to Nurse Elizabeth. And the second way we can infer she made the switch is by looking at the baby's toxicology report. We can clearly see that phentermine was indeed present in her system because she passed it on to her baby. So it's safe to infer from two sources of evidence that Alexee stopped taking her birth control because it was causing her to gain weight, and she replaced it with phentermine. Now, let's pause and consider the significance of her statements and the choices she made here. Alexee conveyed to Nurse Elizabeth that she was worried about backlash or bad outcomes because she had stopped taking her birth control and started taking diet pills instead. In case you don't already know, phentermine is a medication that is designed to aid in weight loss. In fact, it's a very popular weight loss medication. But guess what it is not? It's not a contraceptive. No rational adult would substitute a contraceptive for a weight loss medication. Now, we just confirmed that she indeed made the switch. It's on the toxicology report. Birth control serves a vital purpose in preventing unintended pregnancies, and phentermine, while addressing weight concerns, is not a replacement for contraception. These two medications are not interchangeable. When Alexee made the choice to replace her birth control with phentermine, she implicitly acknowledged two fundamental facts: that she was engaging in intercourse and that she had concerns about weight gain. Think about it. Alexee was seeking to address two distinct concerns. What she needed was a solution that would help her avoid the side effects of birth control. In other words, the ideal solution would have provided her protection from potential pregnancy and aided her in losing weight simultaneously. It isn't a matter of choosing one over the other, but rather a desire for both to be addressed simultaneously. No doctor or logical person would substitute one for the other. One would take both, not one instead of the other. It's simple. If Alexee stopped taking her birth control, kept doing the nasty, and kept gaining weight despite her physically active lifestyle, at the very least, Alexee would have suspected that she could have been pregnant, right? If you are doing the nasty, pregnancy is a risk. But if you're doing the nasty without protection, pregnancy is inevitable. Let's not be fooled. Alexee is a smart, disciplined, and resourceful young woman. She excelled in school, she excelled at cheerleading, she got accepted into university, and she demonstrated her ability to obtain birth control and phentermine, both of which require a prescription. Her purpose for taking the birth control is evident. She was having intimate relations. It's also apparent that Alexee had a clear understanding of why she needed phentermine. She had gained weight. I think it's safe to say that Alexee's decision to take birth control tells us that she was well aware she was having intercourse and knew the risk it carried. Fair? And her decision to take phentermine tells us she was well aware of her weight gain, so she took the steps to mitigate the extra pounds. Let's do a little word math. Okay, if she knew that her birth control provided protection from pregnancy, then it's fair to say that her decision to stop taking birth control tells us that she was also well aware that she was unprotected without them. She was essentially engaging with an increased risk of pregnancy. So then, while being fully aware she might be pregnant, instead of addressing the possible pregnancy, she alternatively decided to address her concerns about weight gain. What happened to her concern about pregnancy? Why on earth would Alexee make such an irrational decision, choosing only to address her weight while dropping her concern for pregnancy? Was there a sudden loss of memory, a sudden lapse in judgment, or did the need for protection suddenly vanish? I propose to you that it was the need for protection that suddenly disappeared. And the reason for this becomes evident when you consider the possibility that she was already pregnant. It's the only reason that makes sense for Alexee, a smart, resourceful adult who was aware that something was amiss with her body. Opting to stop birth control in this scenario would no longer put her at risk for pregnancy because she was already pregnant. And opting for phentermine would help her to evade suspicion of pregnancy. According to news reports, approximately 2 months prior to giving birth, that would have been sometime during the month of November, Alexee was questioned by her classmates and cheerleading coach about her being pregnant. And it was said that Alexee passed it off as weight gain. She likely started the phentermine then. The toxicology report supports this theory because of the higher level of phentermine than morphine present in the baby's system. Alexee had already been confronted by schoolmates and her coach. You can clearly see why here. This video is reported to have been filmed approximately 3 weeks prior to Alexee giving birth. By the time Alexee made the decision to take phentermine, she had calculated the risk and determined that the birth control no longer served her, so she stopped taking it. For all intents and purposes, Alexee admitted to doing the math in her head by asking the what-if question to Nurse Elizabeth. What if I stopped taking birth control and started taking diet pills, she said. By the mere what-if phrasing of her question, Alexee reveals that she was speculating, that she was considering the potential outcomes for her decision. Alexee had considered the what-ifs on her own when she made her decision to switch the medications. And it was her calculated decision that was worrying her when she asked Nurse Elizabeth the question just 10 minutes after being found out. This is why phentermine is such a critical piece of the puzzle. It's the topic and the timing of her question that makes it so revealing, so we can't disregard it. Let's consider the credibility of Gary's narrative. Gary attempts to convince us that Alexee was completely unaware of her pregnancy. But the evidence points in a different direction. Gary himself said that Alexee worked out 2 to 4 hours, 6 days a week. Yet despite this, she continued to grow in a very concentrated area month after month. The size of her baby bump had grown to such an extent that those around her began to question her. When she was confronted about her possible pregnancy, instead of seeking help or acknowledging the possibility of her pregnancy, she chose to focus solely on losing weight. She made the calculated decision that pregnancy was no longer of concern, so she stopped taking birth control. And to the assertion that phentermine was of no concern to Alexee because she didn't know she was pregnant, evidence shows otherwise. Phentermine was top of mind for Alexee. She sought intel on it as soon as the opportunity presented itself. And lastly, Gary claims that the baby was stillborn. Well, according to renowned forensic pathologist Dr. Michelle Dupree, the question about whether the baby was stillborn or alive at birth is not a gray area.
Now, let's take a look at some more findings from this autopsy, which will be very, very significant. Live born male newborn, aerated lungs, air in stomach, no decomposition. Tell us a little bit about that, what that means, because I think part of the defense here will be that this child was not born alive, that this was a stillbirth, or perhaps died very quickly after taking 1 or 2 breaths.
Right. The most important thing for us to determine in cases like this is whether or not the child was born alive or not. And one of the ways that we test that is to determine if there was air in the lungs. And we can do that in a couple of different ways. We can do it microscopically by identifying that the alveoli in the lungs had expanded and were air-filled. We can also do that by floating the lungs in water. The lack of maceration tells us that the baby was not dead in utero. So we really have all indications here that it was a live birth.
Because I've covered so many trials through the years, there are experts like you who testify, but then there's always, not always, but most of the time there's an expert on the other side. When it comes to whether or not this was a stillbirth, could you see any scenario where a forensic expert would come in and have a differing opinion than the doctor who performed the autopsy if you're talking about air in the stomach, aerated lungs? Is that something that could be in the gray area, or is that something that's pretty crystal clear and you would expect doctors to agree on?
That is pretty crystal clear. I would expect doctors to agree on that. If the baby took a breath or breaths, there should be air in the lungs, and there was.
In my opinion, Alexee's decision to take phentermine demonstrates a calculated avoidance of a situation she likely had already figured out, that she was pregnant.
Seeing new video of a cheerleader who secretly gave birth in a hospital and then, according to authorities, left her baby to die in a garbage can. She claims she didn't know she was pregnant and panicked. But as Amber Cogliano reports, many say looking at this video of her with her squad, she had to know she was expecting.
I submit to you that she deliberately chose to minimize and conceal her pregnancy to hide it from her schoolmates, her coach, to avoid confrontation with her mother, and any other negative consequences that may have befallen her. Alexee's desire to hide her pregnancy far outweighed her desire to tell her mother the truth. This is not the behavior of someone who was unaware of their pregnancy. No, this is the behavior of someone who knew the stakes and attempted to conceal her unwanted reality. Also consider someone who diligently takes an important medication as part of their daily routine. They are not likely to abruptly stop taking their medication without careful consideration. Yes, occasional lapses can occur, but discontinuing it entirely in favor of something entirely unrelated while continuing risky activities defies rational explanation. Who in their right mind would make such a choice? How do you think the jury will receive this? It's inconceivable that an adult faced with the prospect of pregnancy would choose to change to a completely ineffective solution. Common sense and reason dictate that one should take both medications, one for protection and the other for weight loss. Alexee's choice to take phentermine instead of birth control was not just an impulse personal weight loss decision. It is a telling indicator of her acute awareness of her own body. She was aware that she had a growing issue that persisted month after month despite her best efforts to lose weight. For nearly 38 weeks, she had the daily opportunity to gaze upon her own reflection, witnessing precisely what we see here in this picture. Only her vantage point was much clearer than ours. She could see it without the cover of a baggy sweatshirt or the constriction of shapewear. She saw it free from obstruction when she took her daily showers. You think she didn't know? Let's not gloss over how consistent Alexee's behavior was before and after giving birth. She allegedly lied about her pregnancy, passing it off as weight gain when her classmates and her cheerleading coach questioned her months before giving birth. During her visit to the ER, she was heard many times denying her prior sexual activity. Then, after giving birth in the bathroom, she continued to conceal her pregnancy from everybody standing right outside the bathroom door. As medical professionals tried to aid her, she continued to lie. She lied to the nurse who asked her what had occurred in the bathroom, telling him it was merely her period. She said she was a virgin. Then she secretly delivered a baby in the hospital restroom, where not even a moan or whimper was heard. And she did not admit to her pregnancy until the infant was found in the trash can. It was only when the doctor confronted her with their discovery of the baby in the trash can that Alexee finally confessed to the baby coming out of her and her decision to place him in the trash can. Let's not dismiss the rational choices that any adult should make when it comes to their own well-being and the life of an innocent child. She failed to make those rational choices for her son. What kind of person could remain silent while a newborn struggled for life just inches away? Given all of this, Alexee's behavior, in my opinion, points to what cannot be ignored, that she knew she was pregnant before ever stepping foot into the ER on January 27th, 2023. This is just my opinion. Now I want to hear yours. Do you think Alexee knew she was pregnant before her night in the ER? Let's continue the conversation down in the comments below. I'll meet you there.